Bran Stark's dreams had grown more vivid with each passing moon. Where once they were fleeting impressions, whispers of ravens in flight or the distant scent of pine and snow carried on the wind, they had become doorways. He did not step through them willingly. The dreams came for him in the hush of night, pulling him away from the world he touched with his hands and feet, urging him deeper into mysteries he only half understood. Summer would stir in his sleep, the direwolf's ears twitching in some shared tension, and Bran would feel a jolt behind his eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, roots as old as Westeros itself beckoned him, tangling in the undercroft of his mind. He would fall, and in that endless drop, visions began to sharpen. One night, he saw a dark river lit by torchlight, great stone towers reflected on the surface in wavering arcs, and the gleam of eyes. Hundreds of eyes, set within the hollows of skulls or behind the iron bars of helms. In that dream, he sensed the drumbeat of doom. The tension was thick as the trunk of an ancient weirwood. The hot smell of candles and spilled ale and blood rang in his nostrils. Somewhere in that swirl of chaos, he caught a glimpse of a young man's face. Strong jaw, auburn hair, grim determination etched across weary eyes. Robb. It seemed impossible for his brother to be in that place of dark reflection with all those eyes. Why was Robb there? And why did fear coil around him like a noose? The vision receded when he woke, heart hammering, sweat gathering beneath his tunic. His breath steamed in the cold air of the cave where he sheltered with Jojen, Mira, and Hodder. The king's road was far behind them, the wall yet still so far ahead, and in the watchful gloom, he wondered if the old gods were trying to tell him something. If the swirling lights behind his eyelids were a warning. Perhaps it was only a dream. But Jojen, solemn-eyed, haunted Jojen, sat across from him, staring. The boy from the bogs had come to him, after all, with prophecies of wings and darkness and the need to journey north. Jojen opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, eyes flicking to Summer, who rose to his haunches and growled low. In that moment, Bran felt something stirring under his skin, as if the blood in his veins vibrated to some unseen chord. He heard ravens outside, the flap of their wings echoing down the stone corridors. Then he heard Summer's growl turn to a low whine, and he caught a spark of understanding in the direwolf's golden eyes. "Danger," said the rasp of the wind. 1,000 small voices in the eaves hissed. Something is wrong. He thought of Robb. He remembered the dream. He remembered how the half-light of the vision shone on his brother's face. The Red Wedding had not come to Bran Stark's ears in name. He only knew a sense of dread, the taste of betrayal like old copper on his tongue, and the knowledge that Walder Frey was not a man of gracious hospitality. Days passed, and the dream returned more than once. With each new visitation, it grew starker. He saw a feast hall. He saw minstrels playing, though their notes twisted into something cruel in his mind. He saw crossbows in the shadows. The old gods whispered in the leaves. He yearned to do something, to cry out in the dream, "Robb, beware!" But in dreams his voice was air. Then he realized the power that twined within him was not merely about being a warg or a crippled boy who could slip into the skin of Summer. No, what Bloodraven had hinted at, what Jojen had gently implied, was that Bran was a Greenseer in the making, a child of destiny bound to the heart of the old gods. Once, the songs said, the Greenseers had shaped entire battles, turning the fortunes of kings through their prophecies and silent manipulations, gazing out of weirwood eyes. And now, perhaps, that duty had fallen to him. Yet even with all that he suspected, he was still a boy. He did not know how to shape a vision. He could slip into Summer's skin when the wolf was near, yes, or feel a faint connection to ravens roosting in weirwood branches. But to truly intervene in the course of events so far to the south, that was another matter. The nights grew colder, the days seemed to stretch in that half-real gloom, and the pull of the dream would not relent. Robb, the king in the north, had already suffered so much. The betrayal of the Karstarks, the fall of Winterfell to traitors, the disappearance of his brothers, the half-whispered news that Rickon might be dead. Through it all, Robb wore a crown he had never expected to bear, forging alliances and confronting enemies. And now, In Bran's dream, betrayal gathered around him like wolves in the dark, waiting to spring. On one particularly frigid evening, as the last light of dusk bled into the sky, Jojen confided that he, too, had sensed something. "I have seen a great wolf with an arrow in its flank," the reed boy said, voice quivering. "I have seen gray wind turn to red, and I have seen a man's crown rolling across a floor slick with gore." He did not speak the name of the man, but Bran knew. His heart lurched in his chest. How would they stop it? How could he, with his spindly legs that no longer worked, with his half-learned power, do anything to save Robb from a treachery already set in motion? Mira tried to comfort him as she stirred the meager stew that would be their supper. "Visions can lie, Bran," she told him. "Or if not lie, they can twist truths. You mustn't lose hope, not while there's still time." But her eyes were dark with worry. Hodder, standing at the cave mouth, muttered his single word quietly. "Hodder!" It was as if even he could sense a gathering storm. Later that night, Bran sank into the black well of a dream deeper than any before. The weirwood roots he had glimpsed in earlier visions were there, and he saw himself standing at the edge of a vast network of branches stretching across the entire land. They were not ordinary branches, but living roads made of wood and memory. He took a step and found himself in a corridor lined with carved faces. Each face was an old god, each face was a weirwood's pale visage, and in the hollows where eyes should be, he saw flickers of distant places. He glimpsed the courtyard at Winterfell, the rusted gates of Moat Cailin, the Hall of Nine at the Twins. And there, inside that hall, he saw Walder Frey's watery eyes, heard the sneer in his voice as he welcomed the young wolf and his mother. Bran knew he had found the current of time that would soon claim Robb. He sensed the future drifting forward like a leaf carried by a stream, inevitable, unstoppable. But was it unstoppable? The old gods had chosen him to see. And if he could see, perhaps he could do more. He reached out in the dream, not with his arms but with the intangible extension of his being, the power that had allowed him to slip into summer. This time he sought not to enter the dire wolf but to enter a raven perched upon the rafters of the twins' great hall. Instantly a jolt of awareness seared through him as though he had plunged his hand into a brazier of hot coals. The hall came into focus from the raven's vantage. He saw Walder Frey's grandsons and granddaughters, the men-at-arms, and Robb himself seated in a place of honor with gray wind chained outside. He felt a surge of triumph mingled with terror. He had done it, bridged the distance. But he had done it in a dream. If Robb was truly there in real time, if this vision was more than memory or prophecy, then perhaps he could intervene. Bran tried to caw, tried to move the raven's beak, but found only a sputtering shriek. He watched through the raven's eyes as Robb lifted a cup in honor of old Walder, the music filling the hall with raucous cheer. Catelyn Stark looked uneasy, more uneasy than any mother at a wedding feast should. The moment was thick with tension, and Bran realized with horror that the crossbows were hidden behind the tapestries, behind the pillars, perhaps beneath the very tables. He had to warn them. The dream threatened to break. Bran poured all his will into that black-feathered body, forcing the raven to flutter down from the rafters toward the high table. He soared mere feet above the heads of the Fremen. Then the music changed. A savage jolt of recognition, the Rains of Castamere. That ominous Lannister song, which had no place in a wedding meant for alliance and reconciliation. Bran's heart pounded. He could sense the moment of betrayal, the instant steel would spring from leather scabbards and arrows would sail. At that crucial moment, Bran felt his body tremble in the cave. He was losing control. But he snarled in the dream as if he were summer, and he forced the raven to land upon Robb's shoulder. He heard the crowd murmur, saw Robb's startled expression as the bird landed. Through the raven's throat, Bran tried to speak. At first, only a harsh croak emerged. Then, with unnatural clarity, a single word, "Beware!" Robb jerked, Catelyn's eyes widened. That single word echoed. A hiss from a black beak that sounded almost human. Time seemed to slow. Bran heard Walder Frey's voice call out, "What treachery is this?" The crossbows were drawn, but not yet fired. In that heartbeat, everything hung in the balance. The watchers were stunned, uncertain. Robb's hand flew to the hilt of his sword. Gray wind howled outside, and Catelyn Stark rose from her seat. For half a moment, it seemed the Red Wedding would unfold exactly as in Bran's nightmares. The arrows would fly, the slaughter would begin, and then the future trembled, wavered, ready to shift. Still in the Raven, Bran sprang from Robb's shoulder, the bird's wings flapping wildly. He cawed again, desperately, as he soared to a rafter to see everything unfold from above. A crossbow bolt sang, but it missed its mark as one of Walder Frey's men hesitated. The guests who remained loyal to Robb scrambled from their benches, overturning cups and plates. Chaos erupted, but it was a chaos struggling to find its lethal shape. Something had changed. The final chord of the false musician's tune gave way to shouts of alarm and the ring of steel. The ambush was not as swift or successful as the Freys had planned, for the alarm had been raised. With that one word, that solitary shriek of "Beware!" from the raven's beak, their perfect trap was sundered. Bran felt a surge of triumph, but it was fleeting, for the danger was still grave. More crossbow bolts flew. Men with knives lunged for Robb, for his mother, for the Northmen. Walder Frey's withered face twisted with rage. He barked out an order, and the hidden archers let loose. From the vantage of the rafters, the boy in the raven's skin saw death unfold, but not as it had in the original nightmare. Robb, alerted, managed to duck behind an overturned table. Cailin threw herself at one of the Freys who rushed forward, slashing with a dagger she had snatched from a fallen guard. The Great John roared like a wounded bear, rallying what men he could. Some crossbow bolts still found their marks. Bran's breath caught as he saw one arrow graze Robb's shoulder, a thin spurt of blood staining the king in the North's tunic. Yet Robb did not fall. He fought back with the fury of House Stark, swinging his sword, rallying his men with shouts of "The North remembers." Somewhere in the back of Bran's mind, in the cave far to the north, he was aware of his real body trembling. Each time an arrow flew, he felt a spike of pain, as if the fates were tugging him in multiple directions. But he would not wake. Not yet. He had come too far. He had to see if his warning was enough. Meanwhile, outside the hall, gray wind snarls carried through the stone corridors, and the loyal beast began ripping into the Frey men who guarded the doors. An old memory flickered in Bran's mind. Robb used to call gray wind the shadow by his side. That shadow was now vengeance, tearing flesh and snapping bones. In the hall, those Northmen who were still alive rushed to their king, forming a ring of steel around Robb and his mother. Walder Frey, spittle flying, shouted for his men to close in to end this. But the wedding feast had turned to pandemonium and the advantage of surprise was gone. Bran saw the old man's watery eyes flick toward the dais, no doubt cursing that cursed raven that had somehow spoken, that had ruined everything. The minstrels dropped their instruments and reached for daggers, but before they could lunge, the Great John seized a large bench and flung it at them, sending them sprawling. Shouts and screams mixed with the clang of steel. The smell of blood and fear drifted upward to the rafters. Bran knew it was not over. Even though Robb was alive, the Freys were still many. They had archers, they had the advantage of the fortress around them, and Roose Bolton might be waiting in the corridors to slip in his own dagger. If the Northmen could not find a path to safety, this triumph of warning might only delay the inevitable. He forced the raven to flutter along the rafters until he saw, behind Walder Frey's high seat, a small side passage. Could that be a path to freedom? He was only a boy, only a distant pair of eyes. But if he could guide them, if he could show them an escape. Swooping low, he let out a grating cry and circled that narrow archway. Catelyn Stark saw him and, with the quick wit of a mother desperate to save her child, understood. "Robb, there," she shouted, pointing toward the raven. Robb, grim-faced, nodded, and they fought their way toward the dais. More men died. Catelyn took a slash to her forearm, hissing with pain, while Robb's face twisted in agony as another arrow nicked his side. Still, they pressed on. When they reached the dais, Walder Frey stepped back, outraged, brandishing a dagger. But his limbs were old, and the fierce swirl of the melee gave him pause. Two of his guards lunged forward to protect him, but the Great John was there, roaring like a force of nature, bringing them down in a spray of blood. Now the path was open, just enough. Robb grabbed his mother's hand, hollered for the Great John and whoever else could hear him, and they hurried through the side passage. More crossbow bolts ricocheted off stone. Men of the north stumbled behind them, some wounded, some in shock, forming a ragged shield wall. The echo of Walder Frey's curses chased them, along with the howls of gray wind still somewhere in the keep, fighting or searching for his master. The raven soared after them, guiding them through winding corridors that branched off to unknown corners. In truth, Bran did not know the way. He had only the slightest sense that somewhere there might be an exit or a small postern gate. He followed a faint pull, an inkling as if the old gods whispered directions in his ear. They turned corner after corner. Candles guttered in sconces. Tapestries stirred with the rush of their passing. Frey men-at-arms appeared at crossways, but the Greyjohn's fury kept them at bay, and Robb's sword met them steel to steel. Cailin pressed a hand to her bleeding arm, her teeth set in grim determination. Each step felt like 1,000. They had escaped the hall, yes, but the castle was enemy ground. The entire host of Frey soldiers could be upon them soon, led by Roose Bolton or Black Walder or any number of Walder Frey's brood. At one turn, a pair of crossbowmen took aim. Bran saw from the Raven's vantage and cried out, swooping low. One crossbow loosed prematurely in surprise, the bolt clattering off the stone floor harmlessly. The other man got off a shot that caught a Northman in the chest. Robb's face twisted in sorrow, but he did not relent. With a swift slash, he cut down the crossbowman before he could reload. They pushed on. The Raven caught again, guiding them to the left, then another left, until they found themselves at a narrow spiral stair. Robb hesitated. This did not seem the way out. Yet the Raven insisted, flapping and calling. The swirl of steel behind them left no time to debate. Up they went, forging higher into the tower. At the top of the stair, they emerged onto the battlements in a gust of cold night air. The sky was black and starless, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Below, they could see the wide dark waters of the river and the shape of the twin towers looming. The lights inside the keep flickered, signifying a swirl of movement, but it seemed that none expected them to have fled upward. Shouts carried from beneath, but no immediate onslaught waited atop the battlements. Cailin gasped for breath, pressing her arm again to staunch the blood. The Great John, panting, slumped against a merlin with a cut on his shoulder. Robb put an arm around his mother, scanning the ramparts. Then he turned to the Raven perched on the edge of a crenellation. You're guiding us," he breathed, as if half to himself. The wind whipped his auburn hair, highlighting the lines of worry etched into his young face. "What are you? Some omen from the old gods?" He seemed almost ready to speak to the Raven as if it were a person. Bran wished he could speak back, to say, "I am your brother, I am Bran, we are Starks and I am here to save you." But he could only croak again, an ugly, ragged sound. Still, in that raw call he poured all his love, all his hope. Robb's eyes widened, as if some sliver of understanding brushed against him. They had to move. Bran felt it in the prickling of the Raven's feathers. The Freys would soon realize the king in the north and his loyal few had fled the hall and might be on the walls. From here, the swirling black water of the Trident extended far below. If they could climb down or find a side gate, Bran let his gaze roam, and at last he spied a narrow walkway that ran along the outer wall to a small turret beyond. Perhaps it led to the water's edge. He fluttered forward, urging them on, cawing sharply. Robb nodded. "We follow the Raven," he told the others. Thus they hurried along the battlements, every step accompanied by the clank of steel boots and the hiss of the night wind. Robb was limping slightly, his side seeping blood, but he pressed on. The Great John half carried a wounded bannerman, for others still followed, along with Cailin. Not enough. So many had died. Bran could sense their despair, but also a faint glow of hope that they had survived so far. They reached the small turret, found a cramped doorway that led into a steep, narrow stair descending into darkness. The Raven hopped in place, letting out an urgent cry. Then Robb tried the door locked. One of the men slammed into it with a shoulder, though groaning but not giving way. Again and again until finally the door cracked. They spilled inside, stumbling down spiral steps lit only by the flickering torch one of them carried. The air was stale and cold. They followed the steps downward, deeper and deeper, until at last they reached a modest landing. Another door stood there, and beyond it the faint sound of rushing water. This time they broke the lock more swiftly. Beyond the door lay a cramped yard, the stones slick with river spray. At the far end of that yard, a postern gate opened onto the river. A single guard stood there, looking more bored than alert. But he saw the intruders, saw the Raven, and yelped in alarm, fumbling for his spear. Robb was on him in a heartbeat, sword biting into flesh, pressing him against the wall. The guard was no knight, he collapsed, choking. The Great John seized the keys from the man's belt and swiftly unlocked the postern. And there was the wide black water of the Green Fork lapping at the stony shore just below the keep's foundations. A small boat was tethered there, seemingly for emergencies or quiet arrivals. Robb motioned everyone forward. "Get in," he said, though the boat was hardly large enough. "Are them all?" No better option remained. The Great John settled in first, helping the wounded. Cailin followed, face pale. Robb turned as if to ensure no one trailed behind, but the corridors above were silent. For now. The Raven Bran hopped onto the boat's prow, cawing. At that moment, Grey Wind appeared, bounding out from the shadows of the yard. His fur was matted with blood, eyes blazing. He leapt into the boat beside Robb, nearly tipping them all over with his weight. But somehow they steadied, and the Great John began to row, straining at the oars, pulling them into the current. The Raven took flight, flapping alongside for a moment, then settled again at Robb's feet, glaring at the keep as if to ward off pursuit. They drifted away in the darkness. Bran's heart pounded with relief and dread. He had warned them. He had turned the tide of the Red Wedding. But had he truly saved them? The Freys might soon discover their escape and send men along the riverbank or archers to the walls. As if on cue, a cry went up from atop the keep. Torches flared. Bran heard shouts and realized crossbows might fire at any moment. "Row faster," Cailin urged. And the Great John, all brawny muscle, dug into the oars with renewed vigor, guiding the small craft downstream. Bolts hissed from the battlements, splashing in the water around them. One smashed into the side of the boat with a dull thud, nearly tearing a hole through the planks. Another lodged in the Great John's thigh, causing him to grunt in pain but keep rowing. Grey Wind snarled at the arrows whistling overhead, but soon the darkness swallowed them. The water carried them into the night, the twins receding behind a veil of gloom and torchlight. Their pursuers could mount a chase along the riverbank, but they had a head start and the night was thick. As the boat rocked, Bran, still within the Raven, felt exhaustion tugging at his mind. He was losing the strength to remain in this borrowed skin. The dream was slipping, his consciousness returning to the cave far away. He fought it, wanting to see them to safety. But fatigue was stronger. He felt a yank as if the weirwood roots in his vision had seized him and were dragging him back north. As his final act, he looked at Robb. The king in the north was slumped near the stern, holding his bleeding side, but he was alive, his eyes burning with fierce purpose. "Thank you," Bran heard him whisper, to the Raven or to the old gods, or maybe to both. Then, with a final exhalation, Bran felt himself pulled away. He woke in the cave gasping, the taste of blood in his mouth, though he had no wound. Summer stirred at his side, whining softly. Jojen and Mira rushed to him, alarmed. Bran's limbs felt cold, his head dizzy. Hodder stood a few steps away, eyes wide. For a moment, Bran could not speak, overwhelmed by what he had just done. Finally, trembling, he managed to say, I think I saved them." Mira put a hand on his brow. "Your nose is bleeding," she said gently. "We were worried. You were tossing and thrashing, muttering about a wedding and betrayal." Bran could only nod, tears slipping from his eyes. He had done it. He had changed the dream. But what would come of it now? The Riverlands would be in uproar. Walder Frey would not let this affront stand. The Lannisters, the Boltons, they were all aligned against the Starks. But Robb was alive, and so was Cailin. And that was something worth everything. Days turned into weeks, and though Bran's body remained in the cave, his spirit was restless. He kept searching the dreams, seeking any hint of Robb's fate. Most times, all he found was darkness or fleeting images of a boat drifting downstream, or a campsite where exhausted men bound each other's wounds. He had glimpses of Grey Wind prowling around a small campfire, of Robb's grimaces as Cailin bound his side. He saw the Great John cursing softly at his injured thigh, refusing to let any man see him wince. But there was no decisive moment that told him how Robb would gather allies or retake the north. The dream fragments were scattered, uncertain, as if the future itself had been thrown off its accustomed rails by Bran's intervention. One evening, as the wind howled outside the cave and snow drifted across the threshold, Bran sank again into a deeper dream. This time, he found himself perched in a raven's body, not in the twins but on some low-hanging branch above a small clearing. Robb knelt by a makeshift litter where a wounded man lay. The king in the north's face was drawn, the bandage around his middle stained. "We must keep moving," Robb was telling the Great John, who stood nearby leaning on a crude crutch. Bolton's men will be hounding us, and the phrase, bastards that they are, will not let us slip away so easily. But if we can reach the Blackfish at Riverrun, we might still have a chance. Walder Frey will not want to face Brynden Tully in open battle. Not while the Riverlords remain uncertain of the Lannisters' next move. Cailin stood a short distance away, arms crossed, listening. Her expression was haunted. "We lost too many men," she said quietly. "Even with the Blackfish, can we muster enough to keep fighting?" Robb's jaw tightened. "We have no other choice. We are Starks and the North is ours. Winterfell is ours. We cannot yield to traitors who shed our blood beneath the guise of guest right." His voice broke slightly on the last words. He swallowed, and his eyes reflected both sorrow and a fierce resolve. "I will never forgive Walder Frey for what he has done. But we live, Mother, and that is thanks to, I still do not know. A raven? The old gods? Something warned us. I am sure of it." Caitlin's gaze flicked to the raven perched overhead. In the dream, Bran felt her eyes upon him, full of confusion and a strange flicker of hope. "Perhaps the gods watch over us still," she murmured. For a moment, Bran wanted to speak, to call her mother. But all that emerged was a soft croak. He hopped on the branch, shifting his weight. Robb turned his head as if startled by the sound, and the king in the north locked eyes with the black bird. The moment stretched, something unspoken rippling between them. Then one of the men called for Robb's attention, and the link was broken. Soon after, the vision faded, leaving Bran in a haze of warmth and longing. The days that followed were punishing for Bran. He grew weaker each time he tried to reach south with his Greenseer gifts. Mira scolded him, urging him to conserve his strength. "You'll kill yourself or lose yourself in the skins of these birds," she fretted. But Jojen offered cryptic encouragement. "He must see this through," he would say. "The eyes of the old gods are upon him." And so it was that Bran continued to watch. Night by night, he followed Robb's small band down the Green Fork, through back roads and across farmland. They hid from roving Frey patrols. They bandaged their wounds with scraps of cloth. Bit by bit, they gained ground. Always, the question remained, could they rally more men? Could they reignite hope for the North? At Riverrun, the Blackfish received them with astonishment and relief. Brynden Tully had not known what became of his kin after the wedding. Rumors of treachery had leaked out, but none matched the reality. When Robb and Cailin arrived at the gates, battered and reeling, the old knight clasped them both in fierce embraces. The men who survived with Robb were tended. Food and wine were brought, meager as supplies were. In secret councils within the walls of Riverrun, they devised a plan. The phrase would not stand idle. Word would spread that Robb Stark lived, that the Red Wedding had failed. The Iron Throne would want Robb's head more than ever. The Boltons, newly aligned with the Lannisters in the shadows, would push their advantage in the north. But if Robb could unite the River Lords, if the Blackfish could call on old loyalties, if the Vale might be convinced to turn a sympathetic ear, for Lisa Arryn was Caitlin's sister, after all, there might still be a chance. Bran saw glimpses of these councils in his dreams. He watched from high window ledges or the branches of a scraggly tree growing near Riverrun's curtain wall. Yet he also felt a growing exhaustion, the sense that each dream was costing him more of his vitality. He understood that to truly save Robb, he could not hover forever as an unseen raven. The North needed more than a spectral watcher. But what could he do? He was only a boy of 10, crippled, half-trained in the ways of the Greenseer. Yet he felt a stirring in the depths of his heart, the echo of ancient knowledge, that the land and the old gods protected the Starks for a reason. That the blood of the first men carried power. And that if he embraced that power, he might shape events in ways no mortal swordsman could. Mira's worry persisted. "Each time you do this, you come back weaker. When we reach the Three-Eyed Crow, perhaps you'll gain the strength to do what you must. But until then, be careful. Your body can only endure so much." Her voice was thick with concern. Bran tried to nod and reassure her, but he knew deep down that if he hesitated too long, Robb might run out of time. From the fragments he gleaned, Walder Frey was furious, sending out riders and ravens of his own, proclaiming the king in the north a traitor who violated some agreement. Lies, all of it, but no doubt many would believe him. Roose Bolton, newly named Warden of the North by the Iron Throne, mustered men to cross the neck. The Lannisters, triumphant in King's Landing, were rumored to be planning a fresh offensive once they dealt with the last remnants of Stannis Baratheon. The noose tightened around Riverrun. Robb needed a stroke of fortune, a powerful alliance, or a cunning surprise to turn the tide. Bran yearned to help, though the how was a mystery. Then, in one of his deeper dreams, he found himself not in the body of a raven, but drifting among the heart trees of the north. He saw the carved faces, eyes seeping red sap, mouths twisted in silent lament. He heard a voice, ancient and distant, whisper, "Remember who you are. In the roots of the world, all is one." He glimpsed the faint shadow of a man fused to the trunk of a weirwood, old, with a tangle of white hair and a blind fold of bark across his missing eye. The faint voice repeated, "Call upon the north, Brandon Stark. Call upon the packs of wolves. Let the land answer." Bran woke with a start, tears staining his cheeks. Was that Bloodraven calling him? Or was it some deeper echo of the old gods themselves? Call upon the north? He thought of the wolves of the dire wolves, yes, but also the symbol of House Stark. Wolves ran in packs. The Starks had always drawn strength from Winterfell's proud bannermen. Though scattered now, though battered by war, the North remembered. The phrase stirred in him, "The North remembers." He wanted to fling that cry out into the wind, let it ripple through the weirwood network, let every man still loyal to the wolf's head rally. But how? That day, while Jojen and Mira foraged for food in the frosty woods, Bran concentrated. He told Hodder to wait by the small fire. Then he closed his eyes and reached out not for summer, but for the vast tapestry he had seen in his dreams. The branching roots, the carved faces, the quiet watchers. A wave of pain and cold swept over him. He nearly turned back, but then he felt the presence of the old gods sustaining him, guiding him deeper. He followed an invisible path that coursed through the land, connecting weirwood to weirwood, grove to grove. It was as if 1,000 whispering voices rose around him. Some belonged to the children of the forest, some to the old Greenseers of legend, some to the men who had prayed beneath these ancient trees for generations. He heard their prayers, their curses, their songs. Overwhelmed, he nearly lost himself. But then he recalled Robb's face, the urgent need. He formed a silent thought, shaping it into words that resonated in this strange, timeless space. "The king in the north needs you. Rise, all those who remember the Starks of Winterfell. Rally to him." The words were not spoken in any mortal tongue, but in the language of dreams of the old gods. Then he offered up a part of himself, a spark of life energy, fueling this call. He felt something shift in the darkness, as if an ancient ear had pricked up at his plea. A moment later, shapes passed before him, wolf shapes, massive and gray, bounding through endless forests. But they were more than wolves. They were the hearts of men and women who still held fealty in their hearts, the stubborn pride of mountain clans, the quiet resolve of farmers and crofters who had knelt to House Stark for centuries. They were the scattered children of the north, and his call was stirring them to life. He sensed them rising, gathering weapons, whispering to neighbors. He saw hidden communities in the Wolfswood clans near the Mountains of the Moon, small holdfasts dotted across the frigid moors. He saw them exchanging glances, steeling themselves with the knowledge that the rightful king in the north still lived. Tales of the Red Wedding's betrayal had spread, but so too had rumors that Robb Stark was not dead. Now, some faint intangible urging, like a dream carried on the wind, told them the time had come to fight. That the wolf was wounded but alive, and that the pack must defend its own. Bran did not know how long he hovered in that spiritual realm, orchestrating the silent summons. When he came back to himself, hours might have passed. Blood trickled from his nose, and his forehead burned. Hodder stood over him, gently patting his shoulder, murmuring, "Hodder?" Jojen and Mira returned soon after, alarmed. Mira dabbed his brow with a damp cloth, admonishing him again. But Jojen just looked thoughtful, as if he sensed that something profound had happened. In the nights that followed, as Bran drifted through half-formed dreams, he caught glimpses of the north stirring. Pockets of men, armed with old spears and swords that had hung above fireplaces. Mountain clan leaders riding shaggy garrons, swearing oaths in guttural voices. One by one, the smaller houses that had once marched under the dire wolf banner began to whisper the name Stark again, ignoring the Bolton's usurpation. The wave of discontent swelled. Some illusions of Bolton or Frey authority crumbled in remote regions where the people had never fully accepted those betrayers. The movement was quiet, stealthy, but unstoppable. Even if the Boltons sent men to enforce their rule, they faced ambushes in the frosty passes or found holdfast gates barred against them. The north was a harsh land, loyal once spurred to fury, and the old gods had awakened that fury. These were only ripples. It would take time for these ragtag forces to coalesce into a true army. But in Riverrun, Robb Stark felt the change, even if he did not fully understand it. Scouts brought word that northern enclaves were rebelling, that the Bolton garrison at the Dread Fort was stretched thin, that the Umbers up near Last Hearth had refused to bend the knee. One rumor claimed that the Manderleys at White Harbor were building ships in secret. And though Walder Frey threatened to starve out Riverrun, the Tully defenses held strong under the Blackfish, and more outriders arrived daily, swearing they had come to serve the true king in the north. From a high window, that same raven perched, and Robb stood looking at it, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "It's as though the north itself is fighting back," he said quietly to Cailin, who stood beside him. She nodded, though her eyes were weary. "There is still the matter of Lord Tywin and the Lannisters," she reminded him. "And Walder Frey will not rest until he sees us in graves. We are far from safe." "All the same," Robb replied, "I feel hope for the first time since before the wedding." He paused, reaching out to the raven as if to stroke its feathers. The bird hopped away, cawing. "If only we had more allies in the south. But we must place our faith in the north and the old gods." Then, in a softer voice, he added, "And in whoever warned us that night." That voice from the raven, if not a message from the gods themselves, then from a friend I've yet to know. Cailin gave him a searching look. "Your father believed in the old gods," she said. "He prayed beneath the heart tree at Winterfell. The Stark line has always had a special bond with the land, or so they say. Perhaps there is more truth in those old stories than we ever guessed." Her expression was tinged with sorrow and longing for Ned, for her lost home, for the children she believed dead or gone. Bran wished he could cry out in that moment, "I am alive, mother, here in the north, fighting for you and Robb." But he only managed a tired croak. Weeks slipped into months. The siege lines around Riverrun tightened, but the Freys had trouble mustering enough men to press a proper assault, with many of them scattered in search of the runaway king as Walder Frey spat. The Lannisters were slow to aid, embroiled in their own intrigues at King's Landing. Meanwhile, under cover of stealth and night, more outriders from the north trickled into the Riverlands, forging a clandestine corridor that bypassed the neck where Bolton men watched the roads. The couriers were guided, it was whispered, by uncanny luck or secret instructions that passed from one weirwood grove to another, as though the land itself guided them to Riverrun's gates. Robb, wounded though he was, took heart at every new arrival. The Blackfish drilled them day by day, forging a ragtag force into something that might stand a chance. Now and again, Bran glimpsed White Harbor raising banners, the Manderleys forging alliances with lesser lords who despised the Boltons. He saw a frigid region near the Bay of Seals, where clans of fishermen pledged their spears to the memory of Ned Stark. Each time he woke, body trembling, nose dripping blood, Mira would fuss. "If you kill yourself doing this, none of it will matter." Bran would only look at her with bleary eyes. "I have to see it through," he whispered. At last, the day came that a northern host, large by the standards of this battered war, moved through the neck with cunning, skirting the strongholds that might have blocked them. The Umbers, the Manderleys, mountain clans, even some of the scattered Hornwoods and Glovers found each other in a hidden rendezvous. They struck south, a ragged army perhaps 6,000 or 7,000 strong, braving the autumn rains and muddy roads. Word preceded them that the king in the north yet lived, that Walder Frey's treachery had failed to break the wolf's spirit. Robb felt them coming, day by day, as he studied reports in Riverrun's war room, and so did the Freys, alarmed, redoubling their efforts. The castle was besieged in earnest now. Lines of tents with the twin tower sigil ringed the horizon, along with some Lannister banners. The Great John and Robb took to the walls, measuring the enemy's strength. Meanwhile, within the keep, morale soared with each rumor of the approaching northern army. The Blackfish prepared for a sally, determined to break the siege from within at the right moment. Cailin prayed in the godswood, perhaps recalling Ned's own devotions. The raven perched above her, silent. In the far north, in the cave, Bran sensed the culminating struggle. He had done what he could from afar, yet the tension weighed on him. He hovered each night in the dream realm, glimpsing the swirl of events. Then, at last, on a cold dawn, the Freys launched an all-out assault, intent on seizing Riverrun before the Northmen arrived. Their siege engines battered at the walls, crossbowmen rained bolts upon the battlements, and foot soldiers marched forward with ladders, braving the defenders' arrows. The castle fought back with arrows and rocks, scalding oil, and the fierce roars of the Grey John. At the forefront, Robb stood with his shield up, an archer's bracer on his forearm, letting arrows fly with lethal precision despite the bandage beneath his mail. Grey wind prowled the ramparts, snapping at any who dared climb within reach. 4 hours the battle raged. The Freys pressed hard, determined to bring down the Tully fortress. A corner of the outer wall began to crumble under the pounding of a massive ram, but the defenders poured through the breach with spears and blades, driving back the invaders. Screams, blood, and mud painted a scene of chaos. Walder Frey himself did not appear, staying ensconced in his comfortable tent behind the lines, but his grandsons led the charge. Arrows darkened the skies. Fire pots splashed against stone. The sun rose high, the defenders grew weary, and the outcome hung in the balance. Then, just as dusk threatened to descend, a horn blast echoed across the fields. One long note, low and mournful, then 3 shorter notes. The entire battlefield seemed to pause. A second horn replied from the distance. The phrase in the siege lines turned, confusion rippling through their ranks. Robb lifted his head on the walls, hope lighting his eyes. The Blackfish, panting, stared across the river. From the darkening north came the banners of the Wolf's Head. Thousands of men marched in a scattered line, with small cavalry units at the fore. The Umber's giant in chains standard rose alongside the trident of the Manderleys, and among them were lesser banners all swirling together in a tide. The northern host had arrived. Caught between the castle's defenders and the new threat, the Freys found themselves squeezed. Panic spread through the ranks. The hungry men inside Riverrun let out a jubilant cry. The Great John bellowed, the North remembers, and the defenders surged from the gates in a counterattack, driving the Freys back toward the river. Arrows rained from above, cavalry thundered from the flanks, and in the chaos their neat lines collapsed. The battle dissolved into a confused melee, with some trying to stand and fight, others fleeing. Walder Frey's tent vanished in the swirl of dust as men ran. The combined might of the Riverrun garrison and the northern reinforcements hammered the disorganized Frey lines, sending them scattering. Robb came pouring out on horseback with Grey Wind loping beside him, rallying both Tully men and Northmen in a final drive. Night fell, torches flared, and the fields burned with the fury of war. By the time the moon rose, the Frey host was broken, many drowned in the river or cut down in flight. A handful surrendered, cowering beneath the black banners of the north. The siege was lifted. Bran saw it all in dream glimpses, soared above the battlefield in the form of a raven, exulting in the victory that might never have been. If not for that single warning on that fateful wedding night, if not for the call he sent through the Weirwood network, none of this would have happened. Robb would be dead, the Freys triumphant. Instead, the king in the north lived, battered but unbroken. The men chanted his name, Stark. Stark. And the next day, they hailed him at the gates of Riverrun, cheering as he and Cailin embraced the Blackfish, tears of relief in their eyes. Grey Wind lifted his bloody muzzle, howling at the overcast sky. In the hush that followed the battlefield's carnage, Robb and the northern lords convened in the castle's great hall. They took stock of their losses, many men had fallen, and the war was far from won. The Lannisters still reigned in King's Landing, the Boltons still squatted in the north, and Walder Frey himself had slithered away. But for the first time in what seemed like ages, there was genuine hope. Envoys arrived from the Vale, hinting at possible alliance if Sansa Stark's claim or safety could be assured. The Blackfish spoke of picking off Frey strongholds along the Trident. Others talked of forging a corridor back to Winterfell and overthrowing the Boltons once and for all. Meanwhile, Robb Stark remained troubled by one mystery. In a private moment, he went to the Godwood of Riverrun, a small courtyard with a single red-leafed weirwood. He knelt by the pool, Grey Wind sitting at his side. He gazed into the carved face of the heart tree whose eyes bled sap. The raven perched overhead. Bran, in spirit, watched quietly. Robb pressed a hand against the trunk. "If you can hear me," he murmured, voice low, "whoever you are, whatever you are, thank you. You saved me at the Twins. You saved my mother. I owe my life to you. If you were the old gods, or some spirit of House Stark, I pledge to you now, I will restore the North. I will avenge the wrongs done to us and defend our people. I will be worthy of your blessing." His voice quavered and Grey Wind whined softly. Bran wanted to reach out to speak. In the stillness of the dream, he could feel the bark of the weirwood as if it were part of himself. Every ring in the wood resonated with ancient memory. For a moment, it seemed the entire world sighed. Then, with great effort, Bran tried to channel words through the heart tree, though his skill was far from complete. A whisper of leaves, a rustle in the breeze. "You are not alone." It was the barest hint of a voice, scarcely audible. Robb froze, eyes wide. The wind died. Had he imagined it? A tear slipped down Robb's cheek. He bowed his head in reverence. Grey Wind lifted his muzzle to the sky and let out a low howl that echoed against the battlements. The raven hopped on the branch overhead, cawing a single time. And in that caw was the echo of every bond between brothers, every memory of childhood days running through the courtyards of Winterfell, every promise unspoken. Robb Stark looked up, eyes shining, but he could see only the raven's black wings, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Back in the cave, far to the north, Bran opened his eyes. The strain of what he had done at the Red Wedding and all that followed had cost him dearly. His body felt weak, stiff, and cold, his limbs hardly responding. Yet a warmth spread in his chest at the thought that Robb lived and not just lived, but stood on the verge of reclaiming their birthright. Jojen Reed approached, concern etched into his pale face. "Bran," he said quietly, "are you all right?" Bran nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "He's safe," he murmured. "Robb is safe for now." A glint of satisfaction rose in Jojen's eyes, tempered by caution. "Your work isn't done," he said. "None of ours is. Darkness gathers beyond the wall. War still ravages the realm. You changed the course of fate, but fate always finds new roads." Bran closed his eyes, breathing slowly. "I know," he whispered, "but we Starks have to do what we can. I'll learn. I'll learn everything the three-eyed crow has to teach. For Robb, for my mother, for the North." Mira helped him to a warm seat by the fire, giving him a little broth. "You've done something extraordinary," she murmured, concern and admiration in her voice. "Just don't forget yourself in all this." "Live, Bran." He tried the broth, letting its warmth run down his throat. His mind drifted to images of Robb in Riverrun, forging alliances and preparing for the next stage of war. He pictured the men of the North rallying to their king, chanting the old words, "Winter is coming." And then he imagined a day, distant, perhaps, but still possible, when they could all stand together again in Winterfell's courtyard, the snow swirling around them like a benediction. Robb, grown into a true king. Sansa, free from the Lannisters. Arya, wild as ever. Rickon, safe and strong. And Bran, a Greenseer among men, bridging the worlds of magic and mortal struggle. A dream, perhaps, but a dream no longer overshadowed by the memory of the Red Wedding's horror. Outside, the wind rose, keening against the cave entrance. Hodder shifted uneasily. Summer patted in, sniffing at Bran's hand, and Bran stroked the wolf's fur. The chill of the oncoming winter did not seem so hopeless now. He shut his eyes and offered a quiet prayer of thanks to the old gods. He thought he heard them answer in the faint whisper of leaves far away. They had intervened, and the course of history had changed. Robb Stark lived bloodied, scarred, but undefeated. The North stirred in response to a call whispered through the old gods' network of weirwoods, a call summoned by a boy who had barely begun to grasp the powers within him. Walder Frey's treachery had been exposed, his grand plot unraveled, and though the war continued, hope glimmered where once there was only the blackness of betrayal. And if, on still nights, you wandered through the forests near the Twins, you might see a raven perched on a dying branch, black eyes glittering with some secret knowledge. If you listened closely, perhaps you would hear it speak just one word, the same word that had broken the spell of the Red Wedding, beware. And in that single warning, you might catch the echo of Brandon Stark's voice, carried from beyond mortal distance by the power of the old gods, rewriting a tragedy into a fragile, precious hope for the North and for House Stark. One not so easily extinguished by the knives of treachery. The days following the relief of Riverrun were a swirl of exhaustion and guarded hope. Dawn after dawn, the courtyard filled with the sounds of the wounded groaning, of men bundling the bodies of the dead for pyres, of crows gathering in black clouds on the battlements. Robb Stark moved like a man driven by some inner gale, despite the bandages still wrapped around his side. He hardly slept, speaking with the Blackfish and his bannermen in hushed, urgent sessions that stretched long into the night. If he felt pain, he hid it behind grim determination. Caitlin Stark watched her son with mingled relief and dread, for though he lived, and oh, how she thanked every god for that, she saw the shadows under his eyes and the lingering tension in his jaw. He had survived Walder Frey's attempt at butchery, yet the war was far from won. A single dawn's triumph could not wash away the field of blood behind them. Bryn and Blackfish Tully walked the walls with Robb each morning, assessing the damage to Riverrun's fortifications. Much of the gatehouse had been scorched by fire pots. Arrows still jutted from cracks in the stone. The moat was clotted with fry corpses in some places, and a pall of rot drifted over the water. The Tully men labored to clear away the carnage, but it would take time. Surviving Northmen, perhaps 2,000, mingled in the bailey with fresh arrivals from the king in the North's newly assembled host outside. For the moment, they camped beyond the walls in a sprawl of makeshift tents, cooking over open fires, patching their gear. Among these were Umbers, Manderleys, mountain clan warriors astride shaggy garrons, and ragtag companies from small northern houses loyal to House Stark. Their banners created a riot of sigils dancing in the breeze, the chained giant of House Umber, the merman of House Manderley, the sunbursts and pine trees of lesser-known families who had long pledged fealty to Winterfell. All had come south to free their king from the Frey siege. Some among them were still amazed to find Robb Stark alive. Rumors had circulated of his death. Some said he had been slain at the Twins and thrown in the river, others that he'd been shot full of crossbow bolts and left to die in a corner of Walder Frey's hall. That such rumors could be dispelled with a single glimpse of the king in the north, battered but standing, seemed like a miracle. His presence fed their determination. If King Robb could survive the infamous Red Wedding, perhaps the north itself could endure the usurpers and traitors who sought to break it. On the wall walk one morning, as the autumn sun struggled to climb past iron-gray clouds, Robb turned to the Blackfish. "We need to press any advantage we have. The Freys are scattered, reeling. We should strike at them before they can regroup." Bran regarded him with an appraising look. "My scouts say Walder Frey himself slithered back to the Twins. He'll have a garrison there, but not as large as before. He relied on Bolton men to bolster his ranks once, though it seems that alliance might have shifted. Still, we can't underestimate the cunning of old Walder. And the Lannisters remain a threat." Robb's mouth tightened at the mention of the Lannisters. "Tywin still rules the realm from King's Landing, and Joffrey holds the Iron Throne. But with the realm's attention split, Stannis in the south, unrest in the Westerlands, maybe we have a chance to reclaim the north. If we can retake Winterfell and drive out the Boltons, we'll have a secure stronghold and a rallying point. The neck remains hazardous, but our people know the land." A flicker of fervor lit his eyes. "We can do this, Uncle." Bran nodded slowly. "Aye, if we move quickly. But we also can't leave Riverrun too exposed. Once the Freys lick their wounds, they'll try again unless we break them for good. We'll station enough men here to hold it," Robb said. "But the bulk of our forces and the fresh northern arrivals should be marching north within a moon's turn. The Blackwoods and Brackens might join us. Both houses have reason to spite the Freys, though they have feuded with each other for centuries. We'll need every sword." Bran gave him a sharp look. "And what of you, my king? You're still bleeding through those bandages. We can't have you falling off your horse halfway to the neck." Robb forced a brittle grin. "I'll see the maester again this evening. For now, I can stand the pain. I have to." They left it at that and continued along the battlements. Grey Wind followed, limping slightly on a hind leg from a crossbow graze. The direwolf's presence reassured many men, but some eyed the great beast warily, remembering the savage fate he dealt to Frey guards who barred Robb's escape that night. Yet he was loyal to Robb without question, and as the sun shifted overhead, Grey Wind paused to glare over the ramparts, muzzle lifted to scent the air. Despite the bandage around his thigh, he remained poised, a living symbol that the wolves of Winterfell were not so easily slain. Inside the keep, Catelyn Stark had taken an hour alone in the Godwood. Riverrun's slender weirwood was nothing like the ancient heart tree at Winterfell, but its white trunk and red leaves offered a measure of solace. She knelt upon damp earth, pressing her wounded forearm against her side, eyes closed in prayer. Thoughts of Ned haunted her, how he would have prayed. How he would have answered Walder Frey's treachery with that quiet, unwavering honor that defined him. She whispered thanks to the old gods for allowing Robb to live, half believing that some kindly force had intervened on that terrible night. Only half believing, because she remained a woman of the Seven at heart, yet here and now she felt closer to Ned by these red leaves. When she rose, she glanced up at the branches, half expecting to see a raven perched among them. There was none, but the hush seemed to hold echoes of something. The memory of a voice or a wind. A faint whisper that left her uncertain and comforted all at once. Far to the north, in a cave beyond the wall's shadow, Bran Stark dreamed. Each night he drifted into that deep place of roots and ravens, the labyrinthine network linking every weirwood in the land. He saw glimpses of Robb among the Tully Towers, saw the swirl of motion as men prepared for a new march. It warmed him, for he could sense the king in the north refusing to bow, forging alliances, stubbornly refusing to die. For Bran, who still felt the aftershocks of the Red Wedding intervention, it was proof that his sacrifice had not been in vain. Yet these new visions also brought him fresh burdens. North of the wall, an ever-growing darkness stirred. At times, Bran's dreams showed him swirling snow and half-seen shapes of icy whites moving through the haunted forest. He sensed an ancient, cold malice emanating from the night sky itself, the hush of wind across endless white expanses. Other times, he glimpsed Castle Black from the perspective of a passing crow, saw men drilling in the courtyard, black cloaks snapping in the wind. He even recognized Jon's face once, his half-brother or cousin, depending on which rumors were true, though older and harder than Bran remembered, with sorrow etched into his eyes. Each flicker of dream reminded Bran that the War of Kings, for all its importance, might pale next to what lurked beyond the wall. But he was just a boy, not even of 12 years, crippled and half-trained as a Greenseer. And if the southern realm was already in turmoil, how would it fare once the true enemy marched? Mira Reed crouched beside Bran one morning after his latest dream forced him awake. She dabbed blood from his nose with a scrap of cloth, concern pulling at her features. "You're pushing yourself too far," she said for the 1,000th time. "One day you might not return from that place." Bran swallowed, lips chapped. "I have to see," he told her softly. "Without me, Robb might never have escaped. Maybe now he can turn the tide." Jojen, who stood in the cave mouth with the pale light of dawn behind him, nodded gravely. "The fate of men hinges on choices made in dreams as much as in battles," he said in that quiet, solemn voice. "But your sister is right. You must be cautious." Bran offered a weary smile. "I know, but if I can help my family, if I can save more lives, then maybe it's worth the risk." Hodder hovered nearby, repeating Hodder softly as if in worry. Summer, the great direwolf, pressed his muzzle to Bran's shoulder, whimpering. Outside, the wind whistled across the rocky terrain. The route to the three-eyed crow, Bloodraven, or whoever waited in the deep heart of the far north, remained uncertain. But for now, the small party had found some measure of shelter. They took what they could, day by day, forging onward whenever the weather allowed. In Riverrun, the next weeks brought a flurry of activity. Scouts came and went, bearing word from scattered pockets of the Riverlands. Cailin supervised as supply wagons were loaded for a planned northward push. The Great John, his thigh wound still healing, roared encouragement to any man who voiced doubts about following Robb so soon after a battle. "We're wolves, are we not?" he boomed, slapping the shoulders of those who looked uncertain. "Wolves do not cower in corners, afraid of the next fight. We bare our teeth and press on." Whenever the Great John walked, leaning on a stout walking stick, men parted before him like wheat before a thresher. Bit by bit, the battered host organized itself. The outlying lords of the Trident, Blackwood, Bracken, Vance, Piper, were torn by old feuds and fresh tragedies. Many had lost kin at the Red Wedding or in other skirmishes. Nonetheless, they arrived in dribs and drabs to pledge themselves anew. Their presence was lukewarm in some cases, fiery in others. But the king in the north accepted them all, forging alliances with quiet dignity. Watching him, Cailin felt both pride and a pang of sorrow. He was so young to carry so many burdens. He was not quite 22, and already he spoke and walked with the air of a man who'd lived twice as long. At last, a day was set for departure. Those who would remain to defend Riverrun, chief among them Brynden Tully, walked the yard with Robb, finalizing details. "If the Freys return in force," Brynden said, "I'll make them bleed for every stone of this castle, but you'll need to watch your own flanks on the march north. There are still pockets of Lannister loyalists in the Riverlands, not to mention any Frey outriders that might dog your steps." Robb nodded. "We'll move swiftly. My main concern is the neck. The Boltons likely hold Moat Cailin, or at least have men in it. We can't smash it by brute force with so few. We need cunning." He glanced at his mother, who stood nearby in a cloak of gray wool, her face set in lines of determination. "We also have to consider the Ironborn. The reports are uncertain whether they still linger in the north or have pulled back to the sea. Theon's father might yet try to claim more territory." Cailin pressed her lips then. She had no love for Theon Greyjoy after all that had happened, but news was scarce regarding his fate. Some rumors placed him as a prisoner of Ramsay Snow, now legitimized as Ramsay Bolton. Others said Theon had been killed. The truth was elusive. Either way, the Ironborn presence in the north had left scars. Winterfell was in ruins, having been sacked and burned. That memory still made Caitlin's heart twist. She wondered if returning there would bring healing or only fresh grief. "Stay safe, my king," Brynden said to Robb, clasping his arm. "I'll do what I can here, but if it comes to it, I'll rally men to join you once we see how things fare. We Tullus aren't about to watch the north fight alone." Robb inclined his head in gratitude. "Thank you, uncle. And if we succeed in retaking Winterfell, I'll see to it that the Boltons and the Freys are never allowed to threaten us again. They broke guest right, spilled blood in the name of petty alliance. The North remembers, and so do the Tullus." His voice had a steel edge. That afternoon, a column of some 4,000 men filed out from Riverrun's gates, winding along the river road in a dusty procession. The remainder, including the newly arrived lords from the north, waited beyond the walls and merged with them in a disorganized but determined host. Banners fluttered in the crisp autumn breeze. Wagons creaked under the weight of supplies. The men carried the battered pride of survivors on their shoulders, forging onward with set jaws and calls of the north whenever onlookers gathered to watch them pass. Some villagers knelt as King Robb rode by, cloak swaying, gray wind bounding alongside his horse. Others simply stared in awe at the dire wolf that had cheated death. Cailin rode near her son, draped in a heavy cloak against the chill. The Grey John, the lords Manderly and Umber, and other captains surrounded Robb, exchanging occasional jests but mostly eyeing the horizon with a mixture of resolve and apprehension. In the middle of the column trudged smaller retinues of lesser houses, tall heartmen, glovermen, some of them ragged from months of siege or hide-and-seek warfare. Still more marched on foot, carrying spears or axes. A hush lay over them all, broken only by the tramp of boots and the caw of distant crows. Yet there was a sense of unity, a grim camaraderie forged in the knowledge that they had all survived what should have been certain slaughter. At the head of the procession, Robb occasionally glanced skyward. He often caught sight of a raven circling high above, though he could not be sure if it was the same bird from before. Every time he saw a black shape in the clouds, a faint pang of wonder pricked him. He remembered the single word that had rung out in Walder Frey's hall, "Beware!" and the way it had shattered the perfect trap. Some nights, he dreamed of that raven speaking in his brother Bran's voice, though he dismissed that as no more than grief-laden fancy. Bran and Rickon had been killed by Theon Greyjoy's men, or so he believed. He tried not to dwell on it. The war demanded his focus. Days turned to a week and a week into many. The host traveled east along the river, then cut northward, skirting roads patrolled by Lannister or Frey forces. Scouts sometimes returned with reports of skirmishes up ahead. A small band of Frey outriders tried to harass the rear guard one night, but the Great John led a countercharge that scattered them. Tensions ran high, and each new dawn threatened fresh conflict. Yet the king in the north pressed on, forging across shallow fords, passing battered villages that had changed hands multiple times in the war. Always, the glimpses of farmland left behind them bore scars of conflict. Burnt-out huts, fields trampled by cavalry. The smell of old ash clung to the air like sorrow. At length they drew close to the land around the God's Eye. Rumors said that scattered bands of brave or foolhardy outlaws lurked near the lakeshore, many of them men whose families had been butchered by the Freys or Lannisters. Some came forward at night, approaching the outskirts of the northern camp to offer their blades in the king in the north's cause. "Frey dogs killed my brothers," one man told a guard, brandishing a chipped sword. "I swore to the old gods that if Robb Stark lives, I'll kill every Frey I can find." Others bowed silently, eyes haunted, refusing to speak of their own losses. Robb accepted all who came with honest hearts, though some lords grumbled that he was allowing brigands into the ranks. "Better a brigand who hates the Freys than a traitor pretending loyalty," Robb answered coolly. Each night, the campfires stretched across the plain like fireflies in the darkness. Cailin moved among the wounded, bringing what comfort she could. She felt an odd sense of purpose. Ned would have done the same, she believed, seeing to the needs of the men. Even so, she felt the weight of each step. Thoughts of her daughters gnawed at her, for she had heard no news of Arya or Sansa in many moons. Sansa was supposedly in King's Landing, a hostage of the Lannisters or worse, wed to Tyrion Lannister. Arya, last she knew, had vanished somewhere in the war-torn Riverlands. And Bran and Rickon. She told herself not to dwell on it, not to open that wound, but at times she found tears slipping from her eyes in the quiet hours before dawn. On one such night, as the men slept or kept watch, Robb summoned several key lords to a council around a flickering fire. The Great John, Lord Wyman Manderly, Lady Meege Mormont, who had arrived with a contingent of Bear Island women warriors, and others ringed Robb. Cailin stood off to the side, arms crossed. A battered map was spread on a makeshift table. By the light of torches, they traced potential routes north. "We have two main choices," Robb began, pointing at the map. "We can skirt east of the Neck entirely, traveling through the mountains near the Vale, hoping to avoid the main highways. But that takes us dangerously close to certain hill tribes and possibly the Bloody Gate if the Vale's knights are unfriendly. Or we can push north through the Neck proper, taking Moat Cailin or bypassing it by hidden paths in the swamps. But that's a formidable fortress if the Boltons hold it. "We're better off in the swamps," insisted Howland Reed's messenger, a short, reed-thin man in mud-splattered leathers. "My lord's domain is the neck, and we know secret ways. If you trust in Greywater Watch, you'll avoid the main roads. The Boltons may hold Moat Cailin, but they cannot hold the entire swamp. House Reed stands with the Starks." The great John smacked a meaty fist on the table. "Then to the swamps we go. I'd rather deal with mud and bog devils than Vale Knights who might turn on us." Lord Wyman Manderley stroked his many chins thoughtfully. "Aye, the Vale is uncertain. Lady Lisa Arryn is said to be mercurial. She might not greet us with open arms. If the neck is passable, we can slip through and strike at the Boltons from behind. Perhaps we can even force a confrontation at the Dreadfort itself." Robb nodded, considering. "The Reeds have always been loyal friends of my father. If they say they can lead us through the neck, I believe them." He glanced around the circle, meeting each pair of eyes. "We'll have to move in smaller contingents, though. This entire host would be unwieldy in the swamp. House Reed can guide the vanguard while others take flanking routes. We'll regroup near the ruined towers around Moat Cailin. Then we see if the Boltons try to hold it or sally out to meet us." His lords murmured agreement. Robb's gaze turned momentarily pensive. "We must be wary. Roose Bolton still commands men, and his bastard Ramsay has a reputation for cruelty. Tales have reached us of atrocities in the north. If they sense us coming, they might lash out at the small folk around Winterfell. We have to strike fast and hard." Caitlin listened, her heart tightening. The thought of the Boltons occupying her children's ancestral seat filled her with rage. Ned had spoken of the Bolton line as unpredictable and proud, feigning loyalty for centuries yet never entirely trusted by the older northern families. She recalled the stories of flayed skins hung in the Dreadfort's halls. Now these same Boltons had turned traitor, aligning with the Freys and the Lannisters for the sake of power. The Tully in her wanted to see them destroyed, but the mother in her feared what new horrors they might unleash in revenge. They spent another hour debating the finer details. Finally, Robb stood and rubbed his eyes. "We have a plan, then. At first light, we break camp, heading northeast. The Reeds will guide the first group. Great John, you'll command the center, and Lord Manderley can bring the rear guard. Lady Mormont, see that your Bear Island warriors stay close to us. I want them at hand if we run into a pitched fight." They all agreed, and the council broke up, drifting away into the night. Caitlin lingered as Robb folded the map. He looked at her, face lined with exhaustion, a faint flicker of a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm glad you're with me, Mother," he said softly. She placed a hand on his cheek, thinking again how tall he had grown in these last years, tall, strong, but weighed down. "You carry a heavy burden, my son." He nodded, expression grim. "It's heavier than I ever imagined. But the memory of the Red Wedding reminds me how close we came to losing everything." His voice caught. "I can't let that happen again." She pulled him into an embrace. "None of us will. The North remembers. We will not kneel to butchers." The next day, the camp roused before dawn, the fires banked low. Men slung packs over their shoulders, cavalry readied their horses, wagons creaked into motion. A hush clung to the processional as they formed columns that split into smaller wings, each guided by a handful of crannogmen wearing the crest of House Reed, a black lizard lion on a green field. The journey took on a dreamlike quality as they pressed into the neck. The terrain shifted from rolling farmland to marshy ground, stands of reeds and cypress trees replacing the fields. The air grew humid, insects buzzed, and the footing grew treacherous. More than a few men cursed under their breath as they tried to march in heavy boots through mud and ankle-deep water. Horses whickered in alarm at the strange environment, occasionally sliding on slick ground. Yet the guides led them with unerring confidence. The crannogmen pointed out hidden causeways that snaked through the bog, warning of sinkholes that could swallow a man whole. They whispered old lore of the neck, stories of the children of the forest who once roamed here, of bog devils that lured travelers astray. Superstitious men crossed themselves, but House Reed's men navigated it all calmly. Some nights, they even harvested frogs or eels from the bog to supplement rations or found small clusters of tubers that could be boiled. Slowly, the columns advanced, scattered yet in communication through swift runners and signals using horn calls that echoed across the misty marsh. Robb did not relish this terrain any more than his men did, but he endured it, spending hours in the saddle, occasionally dismounting to help free a wagon stuck in mud. He spoke words of encouragement to the foot soldiers who trudged knee-deep in murky waters. "Think of Winterfell," he would say. "Think of the hearth fires." Now and again, gray wind would vanish into the reeds, reappearing with a fish clamped in his jaws or fur bristling with swamp muck. Despite the drudgery, The men took some heart from seeing their king share in their hardships. Behind them, the great John cursed mightily each time a supply cart sank. But he did so while pitching in with the strength of his broad shoulders to haul it free. Lord Manderley, who had never been fond of muddy terrain, muttered that White Harbor's wharves were more civilized, but he kept the supply lines organized. Cailin mostly rode near Robb, quiet and watchful, occasionally offering a soft word or a water skin to some parched soldier. In her mind, she pressed forward with a single thought. They were going home. For all the heartbreak that might await them in the ruins of Winterfell, it was still the seat of House Stark. Better to face it with hope than live forever wandering. One evening, after many days of slogging through bogs and watery meadows, their vanguard paused. The crannogmen pointed to a ridge of higher ground that overlooked a tangle of drowned trees. From there, they could see distant shapes rising in the haze, ruined towers at Moat Cailin, battered by centuries of neglect. That fortress had once been the key to defending the north from southern invasions. Now, if the Boltons held it in force, it could be a stumbling block to the king in the north's advance. Robb stood on the ridge with his mother, the great John, Lord Manderley, and a few others. By the red light of dusk, they spied no banners on the towers, no watchfires. A hush fell, broken only by the hum of gnats. Robb frowned. Strange. If the Boltons are here, why no sign? They can't expect to hide from thousands of men. The great John grunted. Maybe they left, or maybe it's a trap. Bolton cunning is the only thing more vile than Fry cunning. Robb nodded. We'll move carefully, send outriders around the flanks. If it's deserted, we take it. If not, he left the rest unspoken. They all remembered the taste of betrayal at the Twins. Under cover of darkness, small teams of scouts crept forward. They returned with conflicting reports. One group insisted they'd seen silhouettes on the walls. Another found no sign of life except crows and vultures. The tension grew, men's nerves on edge. If the Boltons had left Moat Cailin unguarded, it was a stroke of luck. But it was not like Roose Bolton to relinquish strategic ground without cause. At dawn, Robb advanced the vanguard. The men moved slowly, shields at the ready, expecting arrow fire at any moment. But silence greeted them. No living guards appeared on the battlements. As they crossed the crumbling moat, the air filled with the smell of rot, worse than the usual bog stench. Grey winds sniffed the air, growling. The gates stood ajar. Inside, they discovered the walls splattered with dried gore and piles of twisted corpses rotting in corners. It took a moment to realize these were Bolton men, all of them, their pink flayed man sigils visible on scraps of cloaks. They had been slaughtered. Cailin pressed a hand to her mouth. The great John cursed under his breath. Manderley's jowls quivered in horror. Robb walked among the bodies, face grim, sword drawn. What in the seven hells, he murmured. Some of the corpses had been flayed. Others had simply been torn apart as if by animals. Flies buzzed in a great black cloud around them, and the stench was nearly overpowering. A single survivor crouched in a corner of the yard, a dying man leaning against a shattered wall. His eyes were wide, unseeing, and he flinched at the approach of footsteps. Robb knelt beside him, calling for water. The man was a Bolton soldier, his tabard shredded, a deep gash in his belly. What happened here? Robb asked softly, pressing a water skin to the man's lips. Sea came for the fortress, the man mumbled, delirious. He turned on us, the bastard, all burned beasts in the night. The man's gaze flickered and he clutched at Robb's cloak. We fled, nowhere to run. Sea caught us, blood dribbled from his mouth. Dark things, not men. Then he convulsed and fell limp, his eyes glazing over. Robb set him down gently, confusion turning to a swirl of dread. He turned on us? Who? Ramsay? Cailin tried to piece it together. The man had spoken of dark things, beasts in the night. Some savage atrocity had unfolded here, Boltons turning on each other? Or something else entirely? The entire place reeked of blood and horror. Even the crows perched on the broken walls seemed uneasy. They explored the keep carefully. In one tower, they found more corpses, some wearing the flayed man's sigil, others wearing no uniform at all, as if they were bandits or outlaws. A few had the heads of wolves sewn onto their bodies, though the heads were badly decayed. A wave of nausea rolled through Cailin. She had thought Walder Frey's betrayal the worst the war could offer, but this spectacle stank of deeper madness. Ramsay, the great John growled, spitting on the ground. I've heard tales of him feeding women to his hounds. He could have done this. Killed his own men for sport or lost control of them in some savage bloodletting. The man's a monster. Robb said nothing at first, scanning the carnage. His hands clenched into fists. Regardless of how this came to be, he said at last, voice tight, it seems we have Moat Cailin. The Boltons have either killed each other or fled. The place is ours. Though gods know it is cursed now. They spent the next few hours removing the bodies and setting them to burn on pyres far from the fortress. Men walked about with cloths tied over their faces to blunt the smell. Grey wind prowled restlessly, disturbed by the odor of death. At midday, the remainder of the northern host arrived. Whispers passed among the ranks of some atrocity committed by Bolton men or perhaps by whites from beyond the wall. Superstition ran rampant. Robb tried to stifle it, reminding them that whatever happened, Moat Cailin was a vantage point to strike at the Boltons deeper in the north. House Reed's Crannogmen moved swiftly to fortify the fortress's half-crumbled towers, restringing old wooden walkways and rigging traps around the approach. The Great John took charge of posted guards, ensuring no one would catch them unawares. Scouts fanned out in all directions, searching for any sign of a Bolton force. None was found, though they did find footprints leading north. Likely Ramsay Bolton or some small band of survivors had fled. Then we chase them, Robb declared. We press on to Winterfell. If the Boltons are there, we root them out. I want the north free of their corruption. Despite the horrors, there was hope in this turn of events. Moat Cailin, the traditional gateway to the north, was back in Stark hands. That alone felt like a symbolic victory. As the men cleaned what they could, prayers were offered to the old gods to lift whatever curse had befallen this place. Robb tried to steel himself for the battles yet to come. The weight of command pressed on him, but so did the memory of what they had survived. The realm might not yet realize it, but the king in the north was no longer a cornered wolf. He was a wolf on the hunt. Caitlin, on the ramparts at dusk, gazed northward. The sky above the swamps was streaked with crimson and gold. In the distance, thunder rumbled, promising a storm. She wondered if word of their progress had reached Riverrun or if Walder Frey cursed them from behind his walls. She wondered, too, about the Lannisters in King's Landing. Did they still believe Robb to be broken beyond recovery? Let them, she thought. Let them underestimate us. The North remembers, and we stand. She closed her eyes, thinking of Ned. Soon, she thought, we will see Winterfell again. Let it be intact. Let it be ours. Far away, Bran Stark turned restlessly in his sleep. He drifted through the network of weirwood roots, seeing fragmented images of Moat Cailin's bleak towers, hearing crows caw over piles of dead men. The sight curdled his spirit. But he also sensed Robb was not among the corpses. He glimpsed Robb and Caitlin forging onward, their hearts filled with resolve. Relief blended with worry. The dream changed, carrying him further north into the land of endless snow. He saw a swirl of figures around a fire, men in black, men with haunted eyes. A shape of pale flesh in the darkness. His mind reeled and he felt a presence older than time, cold and malevolent. Then he woke, panting, tears streaking his cheeks. Mira stirred, quickly kneeling beside him. Another vision? He nodded, trembling. Something terrible in the far north. The White Walkers. They're stirring. And the men of the Night's Watch, they fight, but it's not enough. Jojen stepped forward, eyes dark with solemn knowledge. Winter is coming. Perhaps more swiftly than any of us can imagine. And so your brother's war, your mother's war, might be a prelude to something far worse. Bran squeezed his eyes shut, hearing again the echo of that ancient voice from his earlier dreams call upon the north. Call upon the packs of wolves. He had done so once to save Robb from the frays. But how could he turn that power against an enemy of ice and death? He felt Summer press close, the direwolf's fur warm against his arm. Summer's presence grounded him, reminded him of what was real and solid. I have to keep going, Bran whispered. We have to reach the three-eyed crow. Maybe then I'll know how to help everyone. Mira slid a comforting hand over his shoulder. We will, she promised. We're close, Jojen says. Once we're there, you'll learn all you need. Just hold on a while longer. Back in the swamps at Moat Cailin, the king in the north did not know of Bran's struggles nor of the nightmares stirring beyond the wall. He knew only that he had a path set before him to retake Winterfell and restore the Stark seat. The men spent 3 days repairing what they could of the fortress. Then, leaving behind a modest garrison to defend Moat Cailin under a trusted bannerman, Robb led the host north. The terrain shifted from bogs to drier woodlands, the air growing cooler with each league. Leaves turned brown and red, hinting at the approach of winter. Scouts reported scattered Bolton men retreating ahead of them, likely bearing word that King Robb was marching north at last. House Manderly's knights, mounted on sturdy white harbor chargers, rode ahead to clear any ambushes. The Great John kept the center while House Reed's men flanked on the western side, using their knowledge of the woods to sniff out hidden trails. Day by day they advanced. The nights grew ever colder, and the men muttered about the long summer's end. But the flicker of excitement in the ranks was undeniable. The king in the north was leading them home. When they reached the outskirts of Winterfell, a hush descended. For many, this was their first sight of the place since it had been sacked. The tall granite walls, once proud, were blackened by fire. Parts of the curtain wall had collapsed, scorched beams of wood jutted at odd angles, and the ancient towers wore scorch marks like ugly brands. Cailin felt tears prick her eyes at the sight. Winterfell had always been a beacon of stability, a living memory of House Stark's legacy. Seeing it in ruins felt like a personal assault all over again. Yet here they were, alive and in force, with the power to reclaim it. Robb raised a hand, signaling a halt. The men spread out, forming a broad semicircle around the gates. Silence. A few shapes moved along the ramparts, Bolton men, presumably, or else reavers from some other band. A challenge rang out from the battlements. Who comes to Winterfell? Robb spurred his horse forward. Grey Wind trotted beside him, muzzle twitching as if catching a scent. Robb Stark, the king in the north, shouted, voice echoing off the blackened stones. I claim this castle in the name of House Stark. No immediate reply came. Then a shrill laugh rang down. Winterfell is ours now, little wolf. The voice was reedy, mocking. Turn back or die. Robb's men bristled. A wave of anger coursed through the ranks. The Great John roared, come out and face us, you cowards. But the figures on the walls withdrew. Crossbow bolts suddenly hissed from arrow slits, forcing the nearest Northmen to duck behind shields. The siege was on. Cailin pulled her horse back, heart pounding. How many men defended Winterfell? Had the Boltons truly set up a strong garrison here, or was this some band of stragglers and cutthroats? A maester's tower was visible in the courtyard, partially collapsed. Smoke drifted from a few fires inside the walls, suggesting some measure of occupation. Robb conferred with his captains, quickly organizing a siege line. Manderly's men would take the east side, the Great on the south. Bear Island warriors flanked the west, and the Reeds scouted around the broken outer walls to find any breach. They called for sappers to see if a portion of the rubble could be cleared. All the while, crossbow bolts rained out sporadically, though the defenders seemed few in number. At the rear, archers returned fire, loosing arrows over the battlements. Shouts and curses filled the air. Grey Wind snarled at the gate, impatient. As evening settled, it became clear that the defenders, whoever they were, had no intention of giving up easily. A few men tried to sally out, wielding axes and wearing bits of mismatched armor. The Grachan's line repelled them swiftly, slaying some and capturing others. Under interrogation, one confessed to being a Bolton soldier, left behind by Ramsay to hold the castle. Another was a mere sellsword. Neither offered coherent explanations for the hideous slaughter at Moat Cailin, only swearing that the bastard of Bolton was away on pressing business. The mention of that name set Robb's teeth on edge. Night fell, campfires sprang up around the perimeter, and the siege took shape. Robb intended to storm Winterfell if he must, but the ruinous state of the walls complicated the approach. More than once, men whispered that it felt wrong to attack their own ancestral seat. But it's been defiled, Cailin told them grimly. We must reclaim it even if by force. The true lords of Winterfell are here now. The next morning, they began a steady bombardment with improvised catapults, lobbing stones to break the defenders' morale. Sections of already weakened wall collapsed in showers of rubble. Smoke rose from small fires inside. A few defenders tried to flee, but the watchers outside picked them off. By midday, an eerie quiet fell. Robb ordered archers forward, only for them to find no return fire. A pair of Bear Island women scrambled over the collapsed rubble near a tower and entered a courtyard filled with debris. They waved for the rest to follow. Slowly, the Northmen poured in, swords and spears raised, expecting some final ambush. None came. Cailin entered at Robb's side, stepping over broken stones. It felt surreal, seeing Winterfell's courtyard in such disrepair. The walls charred. The great keep was half collapsed, the wooden roof entirely gone. The statue of some ancient Stark ancestor lay toppled, its stone face cracked. Ghostly echoes of laughter and clashing practice swords seemed to flit through the corners of her mind. She remembered Bran climbing the walls, Rickon chasing after Summer and Shaggy Dog, Arya and Sansa squabbling over some lesson, Ned smiling gently. Now those memories haunted her. Robb strode to the heart of the yard, gray wind padding at his side. Men spread out, searching for stragglers. They found a handful of Bolton or Sellsword survivors lurking in the shadows, who quickly threw down their arms, terrified. Manderley's knights secured the battlements. The Great John let out a triumphant yell, "Winterfell is ours!" And a ragged cheer spread among the men. Some, who had grown up under the Stark banner, wept to see their home in ruins yet free. Cailin walked with her son through the courtyard. So much devastation. Where once stood a stable, there was only ash. Where the armory had been, blackened timbers sprawled like broken bones. It was said Theon Greyjoy had burned it, though perhaps the Boltons had done more damage since then. Robb stopped before the old first keep, now a gutted shell. "This was where Bran used to climb," he whispered, voice thick, his hand clenched around his sword hilt. "Gods be good. I wish they were still here." She laid a hand on his shoulder. "We'll rebuild," she promised. "For them and for all of us." The next days were spent securing the castle, flushing out the last pockets of resistance, and trying to restore a semblance of order. Robb's war council met in the half-intact Great Hall, where they found tables that could still stand. They made an inventory of the castle's supplies scant. Much had been looted or destroyed. The winter stores were gutted, meaning they would need to bring in provisions from White Harbor or the local villages. The men set about clearing debris. It would be a massive undertaking to restore the fortress fully, but at least the banner of the dire wolf once again flew from the highest vantage that remained. As soon as it was practical, Cailin ventured into the Godwood, hoping to find some trace of the place she'd known. The hearttree stood in a quiet pool of reflection, its pale bark stained red with sap. The courtyard was scorched in places, the stone cracked, but the weirwood tree still seemed to live. When she approached, she felt a stir in the air, as if the tree acknowledged her presence. A raven perched on one of the branches, black feathers glossy in the dappled light. She started at the sight, remembering that day in Riverrun's Godwood. Could it be the same bird? It peered at her with uncanny focus. She stepped closer to the trunk, letting her hand rest lightly against the rough bark. Half to herself, she murmured, "We're home, Ned. Our son has brought us home. I only wish you could see him lead, see what he's done." The memory of Ned's face fluttered in her mind's eye, and she bowed her head, tears slipping free. The raven above made a soft croak, almost sympathetic. Unseen, in the far north, Bran watched. He saw his mother's face through the eye of that raven, felt the sorrow in her posture. He wanted to cry out, "Mother, I live. I'm safe." But he had not yet learned how to speak through a bird reliably. His one success at the twins had been born of desperation and the old god's direct intervention. So he merely perched, trembling with emotion. At least he could witness this moment, his mother returning to Winterfell, the old god's sanctuary still standing. A wave of relief coursed through him, though it was tinged with the sting of longing. He wanted to be there in person. But that time would come only after his journey to the Three-Eyed Crow was complete. He let the raven spread its wings and glide down from the branch. It landed on a broken section of wall, cawing softly. Cailin turned, watching it. A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "You've been watching over us for some time, haven't you?" she said softly, as though speaking to some spirit behind the bird's eyes. Then, as if embarrassed by her own fancy, she shook her head. "I must be going mad." Still, the raven remained, cocking its head. Finally, it flapped away, disappearing into the sky beyond the ruined walls. Cailin stared after it, a prickle running over her skin, as though she had just brushed against a hidden presence. When she returned to the Great Hall, she found Robb and his council in earnest discussion. Lady Meage Mormont pounded a fist on the table, causing the half-rotten wood to creak. "We must press for the Dread Fort. If Ramsay Bolton is there, we corner him and crush him. No more leaving these snakes alive." "Agreed," said the Great John. "We don't even know if Roose Bolton might be elsewhere. He was rumored to be in the south. But the bastard is a threat enough. Best we quell him fast." Robb nodded, though he looked weary. "The question is whether the Dread Fort is well garrisoned. We've bled enough. Storming a fortified castle is no small feat, especially if the defenders have had time to prepare. But I won't let the Boltons linger. They broke faith, they murdered our kin, they took my home. This ends now." Cailin stepped forward. "What of White Harbor and the other northern holdings?" We need support if we're to lay siege to the Dreadfort. Could we gather men from around the region now that Winterfell is ours? Lord Wyman Manderley stroked his thick beard. White Harbor can muster more men, though we'll need a moon's turn or more to gather them properly. I can dispatch riders at once, telling them the king in the north has retaken Winterfell. Robb leaned over the table, bracing himself on spread palms. A siege is likely our best tactic. The Dreadfort is infamous for its bleak defenses. We can't simply scale the walls without heavy losses. If we starve them out, though, we risk giving them time to plan some vile trick. Ramsay is cunning. Meage Mormont tapped the hilt of her sword. We can do cunning too. The Bear Island women are adept at infiltration. If there's a weakness in those walls, we'll find it. But we need time. The king in the north weighed their words. Very well. We reinforce Winterfell, call on our vassals to gather. Then, once we have enough men, we advance on the Dreadfort. His expression hardened. No mercy for traitors this time. If we show the Boltons an ounce of trust, they'll slit our throats the moment we turn our backs. Cailin saw the glint of bitterness in his eyes. The memory of Walder Frey's false feasting, the scorpion hidden behind a wedding, was never far from his mind. He would not repeat that mistake. We'll need to ensure the small folk in these parts are protected, too, she reminded him gently. They've suffered much. If the Boltons learn we're here, they may lash out in raids. Manderley nodded. White Harbor's caravels can bring grain up the White Knife. We'll see the small folk fed, or at least as best we can. Winter's nipping at our heels. So the plan coalesced. Ravens were sent out from the battered rookery that still remained partly functional in a corner tower. Messages flew to White Harbor, the Rills, the Bar Rolands, and beyond, calling on loyal northerners to rally under King Robb. The men who marched with him were set to tasks, clearing debris, patching the walls, establishing fresh winter stores. The old crypts beneath Winterfell remained intact, though the entrance had collapsed in places. Some men whispered of ghosts down there, or the restless spirits of Starks who had not yet forgiven the castle's defilement. Robb ordered that they be left undisturbed for now. In the nights that followed, Cailin found Robb lingering in the Godwood or pacing the courtyard, refusing to let himself rest. She knew he was haunted by the faces of men who had died for him. She also knew the war was far from over. Yet seeing him here, in Winterfell's yard, gave her hope that the tide had changed in favor of the wolves. North of the wall, Bran also felt that hope, though each time he glimpsed Winterfell through a raven's eye, the looming presence beyond the far north tugged at him like a black hole. There was a sense that all these mortal struggles, for all their importance, might pale before the oncoming storm of ice. Still, the land demanded that House Stark stand strong. And for now, that was enough. Robb Stark, the king in the north, stood one morning in the battered gates of Winterfell and looked upon the men and women who had gathered. The Great John raised a cheer. The banners of the wolf's head flapped in the chill breeze. Cailin felt the power of that moment resonate through the courtyard, a silent pledge they would not surrender. The scions of House Stark had faced treachery and heartbreak, but their roots ran deep. However twisted the trunk, the old gods nourished them still. Somewhere in the swirl of ravens above, Bran watched unseen, longing to stand at Robb's side. One day, he told himself, after he learned what he must from the three-eyed crow. One day, he would return to the seat of his ancestors as more than just a watcher from afar. For the moment, he contented himself with knowledge, the knowledge that Robb Stark lived and walked the halls of Winterfell again, that the red wedding's knife had been turned aside, and that hope, battered though it was, had taken root in the north. Outside, the cold wind sighed through the ancient yard. In that hush, a faint echo seemed to murmur across stone and rubble as if the castle itself exhaled in relief, the king in the north. The north remembers. And the old gods, silent in their weirwood vigil, witnessed it all.